Welcome to Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. Today, what we have for you is we're going to show you how to wire your Eaton E-Locker. I've got my buddy Tom with me to help film this because he's such a great guy. And we're going to show you all the steps you need to do to get this thing properly wired. Some things are going to be personal preference of where you put your switch and how you run the wiring, blah, blah, blah. We're going to show you the Timmy the Toolman way, and maybe you'll like it so much you'll copy my methods and Tom's method, because the guy's usually pretty smart, not always.
Hey, it didn't work when you did it. It only worked when I did it.
Tom was a big help, so we finally figured this thing out, and we're going to show you how to get it done. So without further ado, let's get started with this job. So whether you installed your Eaton E-Locker yourself or you got it from East Coast Gear Supply, you're going to get this wiring kit right here that you see shown in the manual. When you install the E-Locker into the differential, you're just going to have these bare connectors. And so you have to plug these connectors into the female connector so you can plug the harness in. The connector has two holes. One is a larger rectangular hole and the other one is much smaller. The bigger rectangular hole is where the pin slides through. So you have to orient the metal pin to where the long end of the pin is going to slide through that bigger hole. When I talked to Chase while he was installing this on my differential, there isn't one that's labeled positive or negative. It doesn't matter according to him. So it doesn't matter which side you slide it into. Just gonna feed that sucker in there. Okay, it feels like it's poking through. That's what she said. And I felt it snap. Then I'm gonna get the other one connected. So now they're both connected. So you can see now both of the pin connectors are sticking through the female connector, and now it's ready to go. It's obviously preferable to do this while the differential is out rather than trying to do this once you install the differential. So highly recommend getting this female connector attached to the wires before you install the differential. All right, now that we have the electrical connector installed over the electrical prongs on the differential, now we're going to go over the rest of the wiring. This right here is the power cable setup. This connector right here is going to connect up to that connector that we put on the ends of the wires that come out of the differential. I'm going to figure out a path of where I want to run this wiring harness, and then this is going to go up to the battery area. And this black one is a ground, and you just have to figure out where you want to ground it. You could ground it directly to the battery, or you could ground it somewhere to the body. It's your choice. And they give a ring connector that you can crimp onto here to the length you want. This is a relay, and you're going to have to figure out where you want to put this relay. And then this wire right here connects up to the other side of this breaker, and then this breaker is going to run to the positive terminal of the battery. So this one's going to get a ring connector crimped onto it, and then it's going to connect up to this post. And then again, I have to figure out where I want to mount this. So that's everything with the power cable and this breaker. So here's the switch that comes with the Eaton Locker. You have a choice. You could go to another type of switch, maybe an actual Toyota switch. I'm just going to use this Eaton one that comes with the kit. And I already have a spot in the dash that I plan on putting this into. This black wire right here has to run to a good ground. So I'm going to choose a location somewhere under the dash that has a clean ground. I'm going to crimp on a ring connector and I'm going to secure the ground. This yellow wire with the red stripe is the signal circuit, and this wire is going to run through the firewall, and it's going to connect up to this yellow wire with the red stripe on the power cable. So these two are going to be connected with a butt connector, or if you want, you could solder them together. This blue wire that connects to the switch is going to run to a TAPA fuse, and this is how the switch is going to get power. So the TAPA fuse is going to go into one of the fuse slots that's also 10 amp, and then I just take that fuse out of that spot, I plug it into this TAPA fuse, so now it has dual 10 amp fuses, and then I just have to butt connect these together, And so that's going to give the switch power. And that's pretty much everything that we have to do. My plan of where I'm going to mount the relay and that 15 amp breaker is going to be in this area of the inside of the driver's side fender, because there's a nice pocket here with a lot of room for stuff. So I'm going to get the battery out of the way to where I can drill holes and work in this area. So I'm going to disconnect the negative terminal first, and then I'm going to disconnect the positive. The negative and positive terminals were 10 millimeter. Now I'm going to switch to a 12 and get this battery bracket out. You don't have to take this one out all the way. It's got a J hook that hooks into the body. And there's that J hook I was talking about. So that's out of the way. Now I should be able to lift this battery out. So now you can see I have all this room to work, and we'll have to figure out where we're going to mount the relay and the 15 amp breaker. Now what I'll do is I'll get underneath the vehicle. I'm going to plug in that electrical connector for the main harness into the connector on the differential, and then I'm going to figure out a pathway to run those wires up towards the battery. I'm probably going to follow this starter wire loom. This is a nice secure thing that I think I can route the cable up to this and zip tie it to this starter wire cable, and then that will be a nice run for it. At least I think it will, but I'll have to get underneath the rig and take a look. I have this harness plugged into the differential and routed up the starter wire towards the battery. And as you can see, with how long this sucker is, it's obviously been made to reach the rear differential if you put a Eaton E-Locker in your rear diff. The question is, do they make a shorter wiring harness for front diff applications so you don't have all this extra cable? There is a chance that Eaton just makes a one-size-fits-all, and you just have to tuck this away where you can tuck it away, all the extra cable. So we'll see. So I have a good idea of where I'm going to mount this 15 amp fuse and the relay. I'm now ready to put a ring connector on the end of this wire that runs to the relay that's going to connect up to the battery. When you're stripping wires, always choose a size that you think is bigger than you need, and then step down from there, because you don't want to go too small too quick and then you actually break the wire. So that's a 12 gauge. That's not small enough. So then I'm going to drop down to 14, and that almost does it. Not quite. So now I got to drop down to 16, and there it is. It pulled out the plastic sheathing but left the copper wire strands intact. The kit comes with the ring connectors that you need to make the connections, but this style is not a shrink style of butt connector that I like. So this one that I got out of a kit that I have, when I crimp it, I can take a heat gun and shrink this, and it's going to shrink around the wire sheathing and make a very good connection to where no contaminants can get in there, no water or dirt or anything. So I'm going to use my own connectors and not use the ones that were provided in the kit. So the kit came with two different diameter size connectors. This one is meant to go to the battery post, and this one is meant to go to the fuse. So I picked one from my shrink butt connector kit that had a similar diameter to the one that needs to go to the battery. I'm going to tighten the strand, I'm going to slip it over, and then I have these cool ratcheting crimpers, and they're color coded to the size. So the blue one is the right size for this because this is 16 gauge wire, and the blue crimp is for 14 to 16 gauge ends. So fit it in there, squeeze, pull back. I think I'm going to do one more crimp. I went off the edge a little bit. That seems a little better. Now I'm going to get my heat gun, and I'm going to heat this up and shrink this terminal end to the sheathing of the wire. So I have this heat gun that has different tips that you can put onto it. So I have a tip that's going to direct the heat to a very narrow area, which is what I want. When you're using a heat gun, you want to make sure that you're not going to actually melt off the sheathing of the wire. You just want to shrink the connector around the wire and not damage the wire in the process. So that's one thing you have to be careful of with this type of connector. And you can see that the connector shrunk right around the sheathing of the wire, so no water or other contaminants can get in there and damage it. So we're not going to show any more of putting terminal ends or butt connectors onto these wires. You strip the sheathing, you put it into the connector, you crimp it with your crimpers, you get your heat gun out, you shrink it around the wire, and you're good to go. So we're going to do that with all the other connections we have to do. So the fuse comes with one terminal end already connected, and this is the one that's going to go to the battery that I just put the terminal end on. You got to slip it under the cover and then get that one started. And then I'm just going to cinch them up with that short ratchet and 3/8 socket. Okay, those are both cinched up. And then you would just put the cover over like that. So we noticed that when you try to close this fuse, there's not a cutout right here. I'm going to put a relief cut. You can't see it in the video, but there's a little lines here. I'm just going to put a relief cut on both sides so it'll fold down. So the little flap will move now, then hopefully I can close this properly. Oh, they actually had sides you could go in from the side. So I didn't actually have to go this way. They give you options to go in from the side, but I kind of like it running linear like this. And then the studs here have to fit into these holes here. There we go. Or almost. Looks like I just got to cut a little bit more out, and then I could get this to seat a little bit better. So that's how it's going to look. This end's going to go to the battery, and this travels back to the main harness. So here's where I mounted the 15 amp fuse. Initially, I was going to use a threaded M6 hole in the inside of the engine compartment right here. But when I went to put the bolt in, the head of the bolt is too big to fit up against the edge of the fuse. So I decided not to use a bolt, and I just went to using a couple zip ties to zip tie to a couple existing holes right here. And it's solid enough. It's not going anywhere. And this fuse is very, very light, so you don't need very much strength to hold it in position. So now we're going to show you where we're going to mount the relay in the engine compartment. So for the relay, what we did is we shared a 10 millimeter bolt hole for the vapor pressure sensor bracket, and I'm not even going to bother connecting up another fastener here. This thing's nice and firm. I got this tight. And then now I'm going to route the cable behind the bracket for the evap canister, behind the bracket for the fuse box, and it's going to run over here. And then this big mess of extra wire is going to stay tucked in between the battery and the body. So I'm going to have to take out these 10 millimeter bolts so I can slip the wiring harness behind these brackets so it's a cleaner routing than trying to route it on top. So here's what we got so far. The harness connects up to the differential connector. I've got it zip tied to this starter wire harness. It routes up. I disconnected two 10 millimeter bolts on either side of the fuse box so I could tuck the wiring harness underneath the fuse box. All the extra cable that we showed you earlier is coiled and zip tied together right here and tucked in this spot. And then that main harness runs behind all these things, the fuse box and the evap canister, and then it goes to the relay that we put on the firewall. So the red wire that goes to the 15 amp fuse, it also runs behind the evap canister, behind the fuse box, and then it goes to the 15 amp fuse that we affixed right here. This wire leaves the 15 amp fuse, it runs behind the fuse box, wraps around it, and then goes to the top of the positive connection, and I have it secured here. So this wire right here that connects up to the relay, this is the signal circuit, and from the switch, we're going to have to run the opposing yellow wire with the red stripe through the firewall and then butt splice it here, and then we'll have communication with the locker. And then we also have to do a tap a fuse inside the cab and find a ground spot. So let's go do that now. So my plan for the location of the switch is using this empty blank right here. It's close to the rear stock E-Locker button, so this seems to make sense to me. So I'm gonna have to drop this panel down in order to drop the blank out and run the wires. Part of what you have to do to be able to pull this panel out is you have to get this kick panel out of the way. And to get this kick panel out of the way, you first have to take off this trim piece right here that goes along the driver door. I'm going to use my JIS screwdriver to unscrew all those screws. We're not going to show all this. We know you can remove a screw, so we're going to get all these screws undone, and then I'll show you how to pop it out. So when you pop this thing up, it's held with clips. You want to get under it with some type of device. You could do it with your fingers too, but it's easier with the trim removal tool. So everywhere there's a screw, there's a clip. So you slide it underneath here, and then you pull up. And you can see the clips I'm talking about. So for this kick panel, you can reach your hand behind the upper part of it and pull back, and you can get it free. It has a plastic clip that interfaces with this metal bracket right here, and that's what you're overcoming pulling it back. So now we've got this out of the way. So I'm going to pull this weather stripping back a little bit because it's going to be in the way of this panel coming back. There we go. This panel is held on with 4 10mm bolts, 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom. I'm going to zip them out with my Milwaukee ratchet. With the panel disconnected, there is 2 other things that I have to disconnect, and that's the hood release and the gas hatch release. It's a little awkward doing it like this. I probably should have disconnected the 2 hatch releases first, but I'm getting it done. It's just held on by 2 small Phillips or JIS screws. So the hood release is loose and the gas hatch. You have to actually kind of pull on them to feed them through. So now I can get this whole panel out of my way so I can lay here and feed the wire through the grommet in the firewall. For the wire routing from the switch through the firewall, I'm going to want to remove this heater and air conditioning vent so I can route the wires more cleanly, because the path is going to be going through here. So it's just one screw right here. So on the side facing the center console, it pops off and then it pops out right in this vent area right here, and you could get this out of your way. So now I have more room to figure out where I'm going to route this wire and then be able to put the switch in. So here's the panel as it sits in the rig, and I want to utilize this blank right here. You just go on the back side and you squeeze these in and you can punch it out. Now you can disconnect the switch into 2 halves, the female and male half, and there's push tabs right here that you just squeeze together and you could pull this out. Now test fitting this, it's not going to work. It's close, so I'm going to have to remove a little bit of material. There's like a little inner lip right here on the top and bottom. It looks like it'll fit in width-wise, but not height-wise. So I haven't figured out yet. Maybe I'll just take a file or maybe a Dremel tool with a grinder wheel. I'll figure it out. I chose to put the ground wire right here. It's sharing the 10mm bolt that affixes the E-Locker ECU to the body. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Tappa fuse, which is a 10 amp Tappa fuse, and I'm going to pull out a 10 amp fuse right here. That's for the gauge. So I'm going to take out that bottom 10 amp fuse with my fuse puller that I got from the fuse box inside the engine compartment. So what you do is you plug in the 10 amp fuse for the gauge into the Tappa fuse. You try to, and then you plug it in. And so now the locker is sharing the circuit for the gauge, and then now what I have to do is I have to take the blue wire that comes from the gauge and I have to butt splice it to the Tappa fuse. So you can see I have the switch here in the blank spot that I wanted. I had to file quite a bit, and I noticed filing wasn't enough, so I actually took a utility blade and cut some of the plastic out, and I've got it in there pretty good. It's tight. I did scrape up the panel a little bit because I slipped with one of my tools, but no big deal. I'm not out for style points, more for function. So the 3 wires that leave the back of the switch are the black wire that goes to the ground where I showed you I put it. The blue wire goes to the Tappa fuse that we put into the spot where the gauge cluster gets its power. The yellow wire with the red stripe goes up along here, and then it goes through a hole in the firewall that I made quite a while ago when I ran the wiring for an aftermarket transmission temperature gauge. So what I did from the firewall going towards the cab is I ran a sharp awl through the insulation and through this rubber matting material. And then I ran the wires through there. So I followed the same path for the signal wire through the same grommet. Let's go inside the engine compartment. I'll show you where it comes out. So the grommet is right there. I don't think all years have the same unused hole in the firewall. This is a 98, and if you have a 98 or an earlier model, I think you will have that plug. So you just remove the plastic plug, and then that is a multi-purpose grommet that you can cut to the diameter you want. You can fit it in the firewall. And the signal wire runs along the firewall. I just butt spliced it right here to the main harness for the Eaton E-Locker. For the power cable ground wire, I chose to connect it right where the battery negative terminal connects to the body, so it's right there. As you can see, I used some split wire loom of different diameters for the wires. So for the main wiring harness that runs from the differential up towards that relay, I used a 3/8 inch diameter split wire loom. For the smaller single wires, I used a 1/4 inch split wire loom. So I use that for the positive connection that runs to this 15 amp breaker. Then I use the same 1/4 inch split wire loom to run the positive cable back to the relay. And then for the signal wire that runs through the firewall, again, I used a 1/4 inch split wire loom and ran it back to the relay. So that's just a nice thing to do to protect the wires, and it looks a little cleaner too. I've got everything wired up. Now I'm just going to reverse my procedure. I'm first going to get the air conditioning heater duct back in, and then I could put the panel back in. So we'll come back after we get this vent tube back in and the panel reconnected. Once we got everything buttoned back up, the cab panel back connected and everything put back together, we read the Eaton manual on how to test it. And what we found out is that it doesn't really translate to having a locker in the front differential. So following the instructions in the Eaton manual on how to test it, they first say to jack up only one of the wheels, and then you put it in neutral, and then you see that, okay, the wheel spins, then you lock the locker with the switch, and you have to have the ignition on to give it power, and then you should turn it a few degrees and it should lock, and with the other wheel on the ground, it wouldn't let you continue to turn that wheel, it would lock. We tried that with jacking up one of the front wheels and it didn't work, and we were racking our brains, why isn't this working? When one of us would throw the switch and the other person would be underneath, we could hear the locker clicking, which let us know that it was engaging. But still, the instructions in the manual didn't work. We would lock the locker, we would turn the wheel that's up off the ground, and it would still turn. So we started thinking, this doesn't make sense. So then we finally figured out, hey, this thing needs to be in four-wheel drive to accurately test this. So we jacked all four wheels up off the ground, settled the frame on jack stands, and then we put it in four-wheel drive, and we figured out how to properly test it, and we're going to show you that now. So Tom's going to get in the driver's seat, he's going to start the vehicle, and it's already in four-wheel drive. He's going to put it in drive and slowly let his foot off the brake to where both front wheels are going to be turning. But since it's going to be open, I'm going to be able to grab one of the wheels, and I'm going to be able to stop the wheel with my hamstring. And then Tom's going to lock the locker, and then I'm going to try to hold the wheel steady, and you're going to see, no way, it's just going to spin right out of my hands. So here we go. Okay, he's going to put it in drive. You're going to see both front wheels start to turn. Okay, you're seeing him turning. Go ahead and stop in a second. So now I'm going to hold pressure, and I should be able to hold this. Go ahead. See how I can hold this and only the passenger front wheel is turning? Okay, stop. Okay, now he's going to engage the locker. He's going to slowly let off the brake, and you're going to see I'm not going to be able to hold this wheel. Okay, go ahead.
Lock it.
Lock it.
Okay.
Go ahead. No way, it ripped right out of my hand, letting me know that thing is definitely locked. Another test is Now with the locker locked, we have the vehicle off so you can hear better. So now you can see that if I turn one of the wheels with the locker locked, they're both turning forward together. And then if I go backwards, they're both turning backwards. Now he's going to unlock the locker and you're going to see that both front wheels aren't going to turn together in the same direction. So go ahead and unlock it. So now when I turn it, the opposing tire turns in reverse and this one's turning forward, letting me know that it's unlocked. So now lock it again. It takes a while to get it to lock. There it goes, I felt it lock. It needs a little bit of input for all the gears to mesh. And so now, again, you can see that both wheels are turning forward and then both wheels are turning backwards. So we have 100% confirmed that the Eaton E-Locker is working like it should. One thing Ton and I noticed when we were testing out the locker is you can't accidentally engage this because it has a locking mechanism. So there's a button here, you have to slide it up and then you can push it. To unlock it, you can just push it and it will unlock. But to lock it, you have to slide this little button upward first and then you can lock it. So that's a nice feature. So you couldn't accidentally hit it. You actually have to purposely push up the little button to be able to depress the locker and engage it. So that's a nice safety feature for this Eaton locker. All right, we are all done with this job. It wasn't as easy as we thought it would be. It's pretty tedious just running the wires and figuring out where you want them to run and zip tying them, getting them all nice and clean and butt splicing and putting connectors on and getting under the dash and running the wiring. It's just tedious but necessary. So we hope this video helped you out with your E-Locker wiring install and you now can go out wheeling with a front locker and get yourself into even more trouble and break more CV axles. With all that said, we thank you for watching Toy at a Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean and special guest Ton. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you get notified when we put out new videos. Peace out. Happy wrenching. Bye-bye.